For 4 hours, one day a month, I can create a month of podcasts, a month of YouTube channel with great thumbnails and titles, and 40 pieces of content for social media.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Uncensored Direct Marketing. Today, I have Justin Moore from Podigy Podcasts. We're going to talk about everything related to podcasts for advertising, for marketing your services, for branding. Whether you have a podcast or not, I think this is really important and an important lesson for marketing, because Justin has a lot of insight on how you can make more money with releasing content of any kind. So welcome, Justin.
Thank you very much. And yeah, like you said, it's not just podcasting. It's also talking about content in general, YouTube content, stuff you're writing. So yeah, definitely applicable for a wider audience too.
Yeah. So, I mean, whether you have a podcast or whether you have shorts or whether you have, lives on Facebook or whatever, this episode is applicable to you, because we're all, as business owners, trying to get the word out there, to get people to listen to us, to get people to buy from us, to have a specific brand recognitions and so forth. So Justin, can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, how do you start in this journey and your primary focus in your business?
Yeah, my journey is, even though I'm quite young, it feels like a long road here, because I went from my parents are opera singers. So my parents are and they're great opera singers. They're both from Juilliard, so they went to the best school in the world for opera. They're super, super good. So I was around a lot of excellency as a kid, and they were very creative and they were very passionate about being good at what they did. And coincidentally, they both ended up running businesses because they are teaching. And so they're teaching lessons all the time and trying to get teaching clients. And so I'm watching them run businesses, never saw them work for anybody. They always worked for themselves. And so I think that really that bred into me. I was like, okay, I want to do my own thing. So I was going to be an opera singer. That was my plan. But I'd also just thought, why don't I learn how to be an audio engineer? Because this world is moving away from performance and live performing and moving more towards the online world. 2020 is a good example. Where were there live performances? There weren't. The world was run by people who knew how to use their computer to make music. So I did that. I learned how to become an audio engineer. I spent 4 or 5 years just studying away and making music and editing all kinds of things, and really just immersed in audio. When I do something, I'm just all in. And it was all for music, right? That was the purpose, was I was going to start writing songs and producing but I picked up this really hard skill of audio engineering. It's like a craft, right? It's something that you can go out and say I have a finance degree or I have whatever. Audio engineering is that version. It's hard skills. And in 2017, somebody came to me and they said, I got this podcast, it's 20,000 downloads. I'm just kind of picking up. I need somebody to edit it. It's taking me 8 hours a week. I just can't do this. I said, sure. This is a very famous mountain biker. And his show then grew to 250,000 downloads within 30 episodes or something. So really just soared. And all credit to him. All I did was edit it. I may have given him a few pointers on whatever I knew about marketing at the time, which wasn't a ton. But I just edited the thing and I loved it. I loved every step of it. But I knew that this was not going to be it for me. I just knew I was kind of at a stage of doing this. And so I edited his, and then he referred somebody to me, did a big job for Nordco, which is a huge bike manufacturing company in Canada. Yeah. And after that, I was like, okay, you know what? This could bring in some money. Why don't I hire an editor and start working on other things? So I brought on the editor and then named the thing Podigy. I asked my mom, who's a whiz with names. I'm like, what's a good name for this? She's like, wordplay, Podigy, whatever. So editor comes on. Then I'm focusing on writing the copy and focus on publishing. And I was like, I don't need to do those things. Brought in a copywriter, brought in a project manager to focus on all of the stuff. And suddenly here we are 7 years later. We've got a team of 20 and I'm the front man. My fiance is actually now head of the operations side of things. And what I do is I'm a coach, first and foremost. So I work with clients and help them build out strategies for their shows, pretty much just help really highly creative, visionary people figure out how they are going to balance having a podcast, sharing their message with the world, and also the logistical side of how do they run this thing without getting burnt out. Yeah. And then once I work with them and coach them and really build a relationship, then I just hand them off to my team, who does a beautiful job of taking care of them throughout every month. And it leads to us having clients for years who run their podcast with us and trust us to do all of the production elements. And they come to me when they have problems, and I help them through that. And so we're like a full supportive agency, but also like a friend to visionary podcasters who are looking to also use podcasting not just to grow the show, but to grow the business behind the show as well. So I hope that gives like a very well-rounded picture of what I'm up to.
Yeah, no, I mean it does. And the interesting thing, like the question that comes up for me is, as a creator myself, right? I run a business, I run Direct PayNet, and that's pretty much how I pay my bills, and that's my business. The content was important for me exactly when you said in 2020. I used to do a lot of trade shows. I used to do a lot of talks on stages and stuff like that. And that's how I got a lot of recognition. But then in 2020, that all changed. And I was like, oh, what do we do? So I was like, oh, let me just, get a mic. And I got this like really terrible background screen. And I was just talking my first couple of videos. I was like, I'm cringing watching them because I was like, oh my God, that's so terrible. Yeah. But like, eventually I'm still learning. I still think there's a lot to go with the show, but I'm enjoying it. I do enjoy it. I found a good rhythm and so forth. But the one thing I'm curious about your opinion is, you're talking about audio podcast. And as somebody who's a business owner that also like, there's a part of me that does the content and so forth, is how do you minimize the amount of time that you need to record, but create a lot of content? So is it easy to say, like, for example, we take this podcast, we put it on audio, we put it on YouTube, we put it on Facebook, is there different strategies for the different platforms? Like, how do you organize your customers or, the content creators that you work with to minimize their time commitment, but get out there on as many platforms as possible and create good content for each platform?
Yeah, I get it 100%. I love the question. This will be a loaded answer, but I'll also keep it short. But I'm just saying this is definitely a jumping in, and I love that. So first of all, audio podcast, that is where we operate first. And the reason I do that is from a matter of principle. And I'll explain that because anybody who listens to a podcast, it's pretty clear now that we've got about 80 to 90% of people listening for self-improvement and self-development. These are busy people who are usually higher income earners than the average person. They are usually, they're family people. They're just people focused on like growing as humans. And so audio first is always going to be important because this allows them to listen while they would otherwise not be able to watch something. For example, they're driving. A YouTube video doesn't work when you're driving, or they're doing exercise, they're running, they're walking. This is a way for us to meet them where they are and essentially give them time back into their pocket to learn something where they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do anything other than just, walk or drive or whatever. So it's like when their brain is not busy, but their body is, that's when podcasting comes in. And so that's why audio first is really important, because we want to meet people where they are and we want to serve people. And so the audio first works for that. But the reason why we also then go and put the show onto YouTube is because if you're sitting here doing this interview and we're looking at each other anyways and the video is being filmed, all it takes is to just then take that and also put it on YouTube. And now you've got an active YouTube channel. Yeah. And all you have to do to get it on YouTube is, the title is really important. The title is important no matter what. But then you just throw a thumbnail on it, get a little creative with that, and upload it to YouTube. And now, great, you've also got an active YouTube channel and you've got the podcast. Then when it comes to Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever you want, obviously we take the clips. We'll take a couple clips. Clips are really... It's hard to get amazing content from repurposed podcasting clips. It takes a lot more effort than people think to have a clip that can actually have the potential to go viral. It's not as simple as just taking a minute out of the podcast. Usually a minute out of context is just not going to have a good enough hook. It's not going to have the complete thought given because it's only a minute. So usually there's some funky editing that needs to happen to kind of cut things out in between and create a highlight like hook and everything. So, but obviously the podcast can turn into clips, which then show up on Instagram. You can put them on TikTok and you can put them on YouTube Shorts. And then when it comes to platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn, where video content is less prominent and it's actually a focus on written content, what we do is we actually run each podcast transcript automatically through a series of prompts it's not ChatGPT, but it's a similar platform. It's called Cast Magic, and it creates posts like, story posts or different types of posts based on the transcript, which are usually about 80 to 90% of the way there and just
Oh, wow.
require a little bit of editing afterwards. So my podcast, full transparency, my podcast allows me to create around 30 to 40 pieces of content per month from the show. And I don't touch any part of the process other than just the recording.
Oh,
And
wow.
so just from my weekly podcast, I get to post daily on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And all this stuff gets me clients because it creates interest and it creates content to back up my claims of being an expert. People can watch all kinds of clips of me. And so I'm essentially showing up everywhere. I'm omnipresent. And all I do is like, usually I take 3 hours, one day a month and record my month of episodes, do a little bit of admin work afterwards, which takes about an hour. And so for 4 hours, one day a month, I can create a month of podcasts, a month of YouTube channel with great thumbnails and titles and 40 pieces of content for social media. So I'm a content machine just from having my podcast be optimized in a way that lets me do that. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And I was just going to tell you, as somewhat of, I speak with a lot of marketers. I see a product there showing people a 4 hour make your own content kind of roadmap. So just putting that out there. I think
Totally.
I would be interested in that because I do spend a lot more than 4 hours, to be
Yes.
honest. And I feel like sometimes it's like when my team comes back to me and says, "Hey, we need another episode," I cringe if I have so many things on my to-do list. I'm like, oh, now I have to kind of get ready. I'm at the point that I'm doing about 4 hours every 2 weeks. So I would love to know how to
Oh, yeah, that's
shorten
quite a
that.
bit. Yeah.
Because it is very time consuming. I would say maybe not 3 hours. I do like one afternoon every 2 weeks.
Got it.
I'm a creator that's lucky enough to have, a writer and an editor and people that can help me out with stuff like that. Whereas if you're a content, you're producing your content, you have to do all the stuff that comes after it. That's, a way more time consuming. I did want to touch upon real quick on something that you mentioned. You said you prompt in order to get, your written content and so forth. I just wanted to know what role or how much of a role does ChatGPT and AI have in your creation process and to create the shorts maybe, or to create the content, the written content?
Yeah. So the written content, it depends. So I have two. I'll start with the written content, then I'll talk about the shorts after. So I have two separate ways that I'll create written content for a podcast episode. So if I do an interview with somebody where there's a story behind how we met or something funny, then I will actually go and hand write out a post. I will, use my copywriting muscle and actually write something out myself and just write a story. For instance, I did an episode that's coming out soon with a guy named Justin Moore. Shares my name. He's in the podcasting world too, a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, like really weird, right? And so I told the whole story of how we met. I kind of made it funny. I said like, we went to war and then all these things. So it was funny. So then I wrote that story out. And so that will be the post that kind of sets up everybody listening to the episode. But if I don't have a story like that and I want to kind of have ChatGPT do the brainstorming part for me, then that's when my team automatically, every single episode, we have a big spreadsheet where I get like 8 posts from every episode, and all I have to do is give a check mark or an X on the spreadsheet, and literally click one button, and that lines everything up for posting. I have an amazing system backed by incredible 2 assistants who run the whole thing with me.
Okay.
And so that's what I do. So sometimes I'll actually write things out, on the spot by hand, but other times I'll say 60% of the time I'll let ChatGPT do the initial plan, because often what happens is like I may not always remember all the things we talked about. And so a lot of our prompts are asking ChatGPT to summarize what we talked about with, maybe listing 3 to 5 key takeaways or something like that. And that way ChatGPT is able to kind of break things into a list, which I find it does pretty well. And then I maybe do a couple edits. And so actually when you're saying that you're spending, 3 or maybe 3 or 4 hours every couple weeks, I actually just a few days ago, I did like a big day because I'm moving to Italy in a month. And so I'm really backlogging episodes. And so I did a day where I did about 8 episodes. So I recorded a few solo episodes, did a whole bunch of interviews, spent some time writing and everything, and I was able to crank out about 8 episodes in around 6 hours total, like everything
Wow.
included. That also includes giving my team timestamps on exactly where I want clipped and the title that I want on the thumbnail of the clip. So on my Instagram account, there's actually a title so that it's not just a random picture on my Instagram account. So it kind of goes deep. But when it comes to clips, I do not think that AI does a good job of creating clips yet. I think that AI can sometimes pull out like one decent clip, but I
Yeah.
don't believe that it's ever going to be as good, not even close to as good as the host going through the transcript and finding the spots to clip and then having their team go and create the actual clip for them with the captions and everything. And my strategy for that is that if I'm doing an interview on Riverside and I hear the host say some word, like let's say, the host might say like massive action or something. I'll write down in my notes massive action. Then afterwards on Riverside, the full transcript will be there and I'll type in massive action. It'll bring me to the exact spot where he said that. Then I can put the timestamp in for my team, which literally takes 2 minutes, if that, per
Yeah.
clip. And then my team does all of the actual production and then scheduling and everything. And so that's how I'm able to kind of manage everything.
I do. I agree with you on the audio, on the clips with AI. We tested it out so we can just get more. And I always thought like they looked weird. I was like, this looks weird. It's cut off weird. They put weird emojis on my face. I was like,
Yep.
I don't like it. So we stopped it. We've tested some AI stuff. To be honest, I haven't put enough time to learn about it. It doesn't seem like people like it's producing what I wanted to do, and I think it's mainly because I haven't put enough time into it. But I do like to use ChatGPT for different things. I haven't thought about making it do a transcript and then using it. So I'm going to use that trick right away.
Totally.
That's a great idea. So we have a couple of things to unbox. You said you're moving to Italy. What's up with that? I know this is not about podcasting, but I'm interested in hearing about somebody you're living in Canada right now, right? Is that
Yeah,
it?
I live about 5 hours from Vancouver in a city called Kelowna, which is one of Canada's fastest growing cities.
Okay.
But my fiance is Italian, so she
Yeah.
lives here with me right now. We've lived here for about a year, but now we're going to go and live in her hometown for a year with her whole family and her friends and everything. So I've spent 6, 7 months there already, but kind of broken up over different periods of time. But we're just packing up and going, and lucky enough to
Nice.
have the business be able to come with us, and no stress there.
I was just gonna say, having a fairly like a fairly virtual business where you don't have to meet people and so forth gives you that luxury. Where in Italy are you moving, if you don't mind my asking? Everybody's gonna come and knock on your door.
Yeah, doxed. No, it's the very top of Italy. So like where it borders to Austria, there's a region called South Tyrol.
Yeah.
Used to be part of Austria, now it's part of Italy, and it's like mountains and wine and lakes, and it's
Ooh, and good
essentially.
food.
Oh, and the best food. I mean, really, even a different food than the rest of Italy, just because of the Austrian influence and everything. So there's kind of a mixture of cultures. So
Yeah.
and funny enough, like the main language, like with my fiance's family and friends, is actually German,
Oh, okay.
and because of again the Austrian influence and the history there, so it's a completely like 50-50 split bilingual place, Italian and German.
That's amazing. Well,
Yeah,
it's bilingual. You would think English would be one of them, but it's not. So we
yeah,
always forget as English speakers. So I mean, congrats.
exactly.
That's really awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I spend about a month a year in Europe, and I feel a lot calmer when I'm in Europe. I feel like the food quality is way better. I've done
Got
Italy,
it.
I've done Greece, I've done France. I like kind of done all of those countries, and it would be on my bucket list, but due to family circumstances, unfortunately, I can't just pick up and go. But I'm sure you're going to have
Yeah.
a great time. So now
Yeah.
getting back into podcasting, it's just you said Italy. I couldn't just
Of
leave that out
course.
there, right?
It's a point of
I had
interest.
to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
When we're talking about, just kind of moving ahead from the AI tools and so forth, where do you see it? Because you said not yet, right? So I just want to kind of grab that statement and talk about it a little bit more as you're in this world and so forth. Like, what do you think the next couple of steps is it doomsday for video editors? Is it doomsday for copywriters? How do you see things progressing in the next couple of years?
That is a really good question. And I think actually one of our mutual connections, John Caprani, who I know is one of the recent guests,
Yes.
he made a point about copy where he said that, he thinks that it's just going to continue to get better and better to the point where it may become pretty close to unrecognizable, which is just going to then mean that people are going to have to develop, different types of skills. And I think that's what's nice about our business too, is like we have the whole production side of things, but if that were to be taken over by AI, and it is, I mean, I don't know where it's going. I think it's getting exponentially better.
Yeah.
I imagine that stuff like video editing and audio editing and all these things are, just a set of like a set of things that AI can probably learn and do. So I feel like for me, I like having two things that I think differentiate our business and also just podcasting from the rest. And the first is that we are also just working with humans, like one-on-one, through coaching and through support and things like that. And so
Yeah.
obviously that's something that I don't think AI will ever replace, is just like the connection between humans. But also people are really worried about AI podcasting content, like AI run podcasts. And I
Yeah.
see a lot of people who are starting AI podcasts or like cloning themselves with AI to do podcasts. And I really think, like, personally, I would never listen to AI podcast content. I wouldn't listen to AI music. I think that the whole point of like podcasting is to have somebody that you're actually connected to. And so I'm not really worried, but at the same time, because I'm not super deep in the world of AI,
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows if it's gonna.
So you're not worried about your day to day. You don't think like AI is going to come and replace five of your team members.
No, no. And I also think, like we're versatile enough as a team that we could pivot to becoming masters of using the AI as well,
Yeah.
rather than, so yeah, I think I'm not super worried about it.
I think that's what it is. And that's the answer that I like to hear from creators is that, if it does become something, like, I'm not worried about it. I was like, well, what if for my space or my world is, Bitcoin, crypto and all that, is that taking
Mm,
over payments? I was like, I'll just find a way to adapt. You know what I mean?
yeah,
I'm not afraid of anything. I've adapted through so many things. What's the difference with this? If you're scared of it, I think that's a testament to the lack of your skill. Personally, I
to-
think that's where it comes from.
totally.
Yeah. So I mean, kind of moving on from AI and getting back into like the real nitty gritty of podcasting.
Yeah.
What do you think that every business needs to have a podcast, or where should people focus? Like you said, start with audio first. If you're a business owner selling any kind of B2C product, any kind of consumer product, do you think it's necessary to have a podcast in this day and age? Or what are your thoughts on using podcasting as a tool for marketing?
I think that when it comes to your presence online, if you have a business that is big enough to support outsourcing or hiring a team or working with somebody to have a podcast running, then
Yeah.
I just always see it as a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Because what we're finding right now is like your any kind of long form content that you have, whether it's a YouTube channel, podcast, or if it's both, like I talked about, like how we do it, you need somewhere on the internet where people can spend time with you, like a home of your business. And the thing with like the short clips and with the written content is that it just like lacks depth, and it means that people can't spend a ton of time with you.
Yeah.
Whereas when you are talking about podcasting, you are creating a space where, like people can spend hours and hours with you, building that connection with you, learning about your values and your philosophies and all that stuff. And so if you are doing something in your business like, running ads or trying to do any kind of like outbound stuff, then having a podcast is almost like, being able to spend time with people one on one without you actually having to be the one spending that time with them. Because
Okay.
the first thing that people are going to do when they decide whether or not they want to work with you is they're going to want to consume some type of thing from you where they can actually get to know you better and like get to know you in full. And so
Okay.
that's where we see one of the big powers of podcasting. But I think like the people who we work with, we don't work with as many brands as we do with individuals who are running a like personal brand type business, like where they are the front facing person. And I personally believe that if you really are honed in on what your message is and you have a clear purpose and you have proven results, and if you have a business that is bringing in, like a good amount of money every single month,
Yeah.
then starting a podcast is an absolute no-brainer, because all it is that message gets to be put into long form content, and you're just talking about the same stuff that you're always talking about, but you're doing it in a form that's evergreen, so people can always come back and listen to your ideas again and spend more and more time with you. And so I think like when you get to the point where your message is so honed and your business can support it, having a podcast is just a way to connect with people in long form content.
Okay. And how do you think like the way that I did it, when I say the way that I did it, I just literally said, I want to start a podcast. I just kind of came up with a name, put a background and start. Is that usually the best way, or what kind of steps should you take to plan, launching a podcast?
Yeah, I think that, so my opinion on podcasting is that if you're going to spend a lot of time on something like podcasting, if you're going to be putting in an hour or 2 hours a week or whatever, then I believe that it's best to set it up as best as you can, as right as you can at the start, so that every hour that you put into it is as effective as possible and is as well spent as possible. And there's a lot of things that we see with podcasts where the show is essentially like, it's almost impossible for the show to grow because it's like filling water into a leaky bucket. So when new listeners come, they just drop right out because the show is not necessarily set up in the best way to keep them around. So that's all to say that, like, I believe that setting up a podcast at the beginning should be done very, very intentionally, not necessarily hard or complicated, but just incredibly intentionally, so that every listener who lands on your podcast for the first time, if they're an ideal listener, they are going to stick around because they feel like they've landed at home at the podcast that is there to serve what they need. And so if you don't have your show set up like that, then you're like pushing a snowball like uphill, because you're fighting against, the fact that you don't have your show set up in a way to actually keep these listeners there when they come for the first time. And so the first step to launching a show, my favorite way of doing it, is number one, to start out with some basic demographics. I know it's like another ideal, person profile, whatever, but just some basic demographics. But that's not the exciting part. What is really the key to podcasting is the current situation of this ideal listener, and then the desired situation of the listener. And so the in between where they're currently at and between where they desire to be, all of that space is the mission of your podcast, or you could call it the tagline of your podcast. It's the one-liner elevator pitch. And if you can really dial in that mission, which bridges the gap between where they want to be and where they currently are, then that is the best way to make sure that, when somebody comes to the show, they immediately know exactly what the show is about. And so an example of this for my podcast would be like, if I think about where people are currently at, they would be, their show is not growing. They're spending a ton of time on it and money on it. They feel kind of unfulfilled. They are kind of, down in the dumps because they have this big dream of having this podcast become big, and they just don't know what to do or don't have the time to figure out even what to do. And then the dream outcome is they spend an hour a week on their show. Their show is growing predictably month after month. They're interviewing dream guests. They're getting invited onto other shows because of the quality of their podcast. Blah, blah, blah. I could keep going on and on. And so the mission of my podcast, which is the single most important part of my show, is when every single time that I start my podcast, I tell people, this is the podcast that teaches you how to automate and grow your podcast so you can grow your business. And that single line, if my ideal listener lands on my podcast and hits play on any of my episodes, if they hear that line, they know that they're home. They know that this is the show that is serving the mission that they're currently on. And so I think that the majority of podcasts don't do this correctly. And it's actually all done in the intro of the podcast. So when it comes to planning the show, planning out what the first 60 or like 30 to 60 seconds of the podcast is going to be is the single highest leverage factor of the podcast. And so if you are putting out 40 minutes of content every single week and you have not dialed the first 30 to 60 seconds, I believe that the 40 minutes that you're putting out at the back end is like half as effective, because if you can't keep people in for that beginning part, then all the content you're doing at the back end is just going to get way less visibility. And so every time that we launch a podcast, first thing that we dial in is the intro, and the intro always goes the exact same way, and it is never pre-recorded, never ever pre-recorded. It is always a dynamic intro that is done every single time. We don't want dead content in our podcast. Dead content is anything that is pre-recorded that the listener is like, is she doing this live? No, I don't want it. I'm skipping or I'm leaving. So only want living content on the podcast, especially at the start. So every show we go, there's a formula. It's hook, name, tagline, introduce. Every single episode must start with those 4 elements. Otherwise, people have no idea where the heck they are. So an example of that is for my podcast, I would say, welcome back to Oh My Pod, which is the name of the podcast. Then the tagline. So welcome back to Oh My Pod, the podcast that teaches you how to automate and grow your podcast so you can grow your business. And then, so now we've done hook, or no, first thing would be a hook, but obviously like the hook would be something like, have you ever wanted to, grow your podcast on YouTube, but you don't even know where to start? And then I would say, welcome back to Oh My Pod, the podcast that teaches you how to automate and grow your podcast. Then introduce myself. My name is Justin J. Moore, and I've helped over 100 podcasters, blah, 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 right? And so immediately what I've done at the start of my episode is I've taken care of every single listener who lands there by letting them know, here's a hook. So here's what the episode's going to be about. Here is the name of the podcast. Here is the mission we're on with this show. So you can identify immediately if this is the mission you're on and whether or not this show is for you. Yeah. And then here's why you should trust me. And then immediately they know, okay, all my fears have been answered. I know this guy knows his stuff, so I can believe what he says. I know that this show is serving my mission, so I know I'm not going to waste the next 40 minutes of my time. And then after that, it's just a matter of delivering on what the hook was and proving that you're a trustworthy host. If you say you're going to help them with this, then every episode should help them with what you said, and that's how you build listeners. And otherwise, if you don't have those things, somebody might come to episode 50 and you may have episode 1 as the intro of who you are, where you actually say why people should trust you. But if you don't have it on every single episode, then you're missing that, and people come and they don't know what the heck's going on.
I do like what you just said about the pre-recorded stuff. So I'm taking some notes here because I do that in a pre-recorded message and then I hop right into it. But now I understand what you're saying, because I'm thinking of myself, and when I listen to podcasts, and I usually press fast forward for the first 30, 60 seconds, because you hear that kind of thing. So I should actually listen to myself. So that's interesting. So you all those 4, the 4 steps you outlined, you say that should take 30 to 60 seconds. Do you think that in this TikTok era, where people are used to getting like bite-sized things in 10 or 15 seconds, do you think people would actually listen to that kind of formula for 30 to 60 seconds?
Yeah. So first of all, I listened to a handful of your episodes before I started. Yeah. And that was one thing that I noticed in the intro. So you can have your music and everything and everything like what you have and the words that you're saying are great. It's just that any time that there is content that is not crafted specifically for that episode, it's an opportunity for, it's the dead content. It's like it's kind of the thing that
filler. Nobody wants filler, right?
Yeah. And so one thing about the 30 to 60 seconds. So the way that you are setting this up, I think 30 seconds is even maybe more than it would actually take. So if I did a hook that was like a question or something, and then I went through the name, tagline, and introduce, that might only take around 20 seconds. But then after that, we actually go even longer, and we're going to describe X amount of things that people are going to learn from this episode. If it's a solo episode, or if there's a guest, then we're going to talk about the X number of things that the guest is going to teach them. And then we're actually going to talk about why the guest is such a good fit for the show and why you brought them on. Sometimes my intros are as long as a minute 30 to 2 minutes long.
Oh,
But
wow.
I am telling stories. Sometimes I don't start with a question. I start with a story, and I'll
Yeah.
tell a 30-second story before I even introduce the podcast. And
Yeah.
I'm guiding listeners through every single piece of this puzzle. I'm guiding them through, I hook their attention in with a story or a question. Then I make sure that I let them know, here's where you are, here's the mission we're on, and here's who I am and why you should care. And then what are you going to learn? And so podcasting in general is like, if you think about the behavior of a podcast listener,
Mhm.
it's a real commitment to hit play on a podcast. If you're going like, let's say you're about to go on a drive, you want to make sure that the podcast that you're about to hit play on is going to be the podcast for the whole drive, because you don't want to then have to switch the podcast mid drive, which is also technically illegal, right? And so
Yeah.
you want to think about where people are at. And so setting the episode up in this way, you can't really lose them because they're already driving, they're already doing their thing. They're resistant to leaving the episode already because they've already kind of made a micro commitment.
Yeah,
And so
that's
then
true.
all we want to do is just guide them through each step. It's like little micro sales. Okay, here's the hook. Okay, you still here? Okay, so now here's what we're doing. Here's the mission. You're still here. Oh, you must be an ideal listener. Okay, here's who I am. So now you know to trust me. All that stuff, that whole beginning part really doesn't take that long.
Yeah.
But what we find is like a cold, hard example of this is a friend of mine who has a fitness podcast. His show is getting 20,000 downloads a month, predictably every single month. Decent sized show, but absolutely no growth. He was not getting any growth for about a year. And then what he did is he took his pre-recorded intro that was done by somebody else. Even the voiceover wasn't even him, and it was like, "Welcome back to the growth pod." Like, you know what I mean? Like,
You
just
sound like
all,
those intros.
yeah. I used to do them, and so he took that and he switched it to a dynamic intro, meaning it changed every time. And he would hook
Yeah.
the listener with a question, then he would tell a story, and then he would explain. His podcast within 3 months went from 20,000 downloads a month to 60,000 downloads a month. And now it's up to 100,000 downloads a month.
Wow.
It's the only change he made was to his intro, the single change. And the reason why is because he was actually getting thousands of new listeners every single month through SEO, through great titles, through promotion. But he was filling water into a bucket with a hole at the bottom, because what he would do is play a pre-recorded intro and then jump into an episode saying, "Hey, okay, here's my friend Dan. So Dan, what's up, man?" And like, even I listen to that, I'm like, there's no chance I'm gonna continue here. Like, I'm here it's a fitness show. I'm here to learn about fitness and nutrition.
Yeah.
And I have no clue where I am. I don't know what this is. That intro, I didn't even listen to it because it was weird. And so that's the kind of change that we see when doing this. And so yeah, so I feel like the hook thing is important, but you have a longer time to hook people and you have a longer space to do that intro in podcasting compared to like the 1 second you have to get attention on Instagram or
Yeah.
the
Or the
5 seconds you have
clips.
on YouTube. Yeah,
Okay.
because on YouTube, I mean, people are literally sitting there with
Yeah.
10 other videos on the right side that they could click. Whereas with podcasting, like, they've hit play. It's the only thing on their screen. They're already wanting to commit because they want to start their walk or their dishes or their drive or their vacuuming. And so they're going to take a chance, right? And
How
so
did you
then
know I do all of that when I'm listening to podcasts?
exactly, this is the podcast behavior. So totally.
So how important is the written description to a podcast?
Like when you come on the show, the one that's like the description
Like
on the side.
the description on the side of like explaining, because that's where I fight. I'm like, do we need to be spending a lot of time? I try to always think of myself, but I'm not, the one and only person listening to the podcast. So I'm curious on your viewpoint, like, should you write a very long detailed description? Should you keep it very short? Like, what are some of the best practices for the episode description?
Yeah, so what I believe is there's a handful of really important checkpoints to any podcast. And
Yeah.
I kind of like to think of it as like each checkpoint is a spot where you could either lose or keep a listener and then go to the next checkpoint with them.
Yeah.
And so if any of those checkpoints are out of whack, you have a leak in your podcast in terms of people dropping off at some point.
Yeah.
And so the first checkpoint is the name of the podcast. So the name of the podcast should be one that you don't need to explain. It should be one that actually describes what the show is about in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form. That is going to be, it's not necessary, but it is, again, it's like, do you want to push the snowball uphill, or do you want to have the added momentum of having a name that actually hooks people in and describes, like if I was having a podcast and I was starting a new podcast about podcasting, maybe my hook would be like, or my podcast name would be like, podcasting sucks or something like that. And like, oh, what the heck? Okay, click on that. And then, right. And then, so that's the first checkpoint. Then after that is like the artwork. So when it comes to podcasting, artwork should be simple, clear, bright colors, high contrast, and it literally should just be the name of the show right up front, as close to the like borders as possible, because people are looking on their phones and in tiny little boxes. No extra text, no name of who the host is, no name of anything that is happening in the podcast, just the name of the show, like a logo or the person's picture with a name, something like way up front. And that's the next checkpoint. And then after that comes the episode titles. So the episode titles are the next, like, it's like the storefront window. It's like the things that are hanging in the window of the business.
Yeah.
And actually, the episode titles matter way more than the podcast description or the episode descriptions, because listener behavior is going to want to dive into an episode right away to get the vibe. So how they're going to choose an episode is usually scanning between the last 10 episodes that have been released and picking out the one within the most recent that is the most attractive in terms of what the title is. So the next checkpoint would be the titles. If you do not have good episode titles, it's not like it's not like it only matters for the people who are already listening. It's actually a matter of whether or not people will click on that title. So every title should be intentional. Then after that, you get to the hook of the actual episode as the next checkpoint. And somewhere in that, like down the road, is episode descriptions. Episode descriptions are like something like, if people are already listening and they're already kind of into the episode, then maybe they're going to pull up the episode description to check out who the guest is or check out some of the resources that are attached. But the actual episode description itself, I mean, it's like, it is important, but it's not like one of the key things. And same thing with the description of the podcast, like on the side. It's just not like, it's not going to be the make or break as to whether or not people are going to hit play on an episode.
Okay. So if you have limited time, basically what we're saying, everybody has limited time. But if you want to focus somewhere, you really want to focus on your hook. You really want to focus on the episode title. And then that kind of is going to get you the bulk of the rewards of an episode.
Yeah.
I'm very curious, like in terms of tech and like, microphones and cameras and the lighting and so forth, like how fancy do you get? And do you have any specific recommendation? I know a lot of people hate to give specific recommendations. We're not going to hold you to it. Is my mic good? Is my camera good? What should I get? Like I'm just starting out this podcast to test out, if I have an audience, if I have something going, what do you think are the basic elements that somebody needs? And if you have some brands, like that you can spit out that people can trust, that's always helpful.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, I feel like it'd be fun to just go over like kind of what you're using now and then kind of connect that back to all of my recommendations. And so, I mean, first of all, what I'm using is the setup that I would recommend to most of the clients that we work with, other than the fact that I'm using a more high-end microphone. I only bought this because I also use it for recording vocals for songs, and those need to be super high fidelity. Yeah. But there's a version of this microphone that I would recommend. It's about half the price. It's called the Shure MV7. So that's the microphone that I would recommend anybody get. Then all you need is some type of stand to kind of have the mic be mobile and versatile, because you're going to want to be able to move it around a little bit, and you're going to want to be able to have the freedom of moving it. So I would recommend a boom stand, like an arm stand. The specific one that I'm using is about $100. It's called the Rode PSA1. So RODE PSA1. Great mic stand. And then all you need other than that is like some type of camera for the visuals, because that mic will actually plug directly into your laptop. So super simple setup. You just need the mic, the stand. It'll come with a cord right into the laptop, easy. And then you need a camera. And people are like, oh, like I don't want to get a webcam. I don't want to get this. No webcam You can go for the DSLR if you're like jumping into this with a massive budget or something and you want to go like crazy. But if you don't, just use the back camera of your iPhone with your computer. So if you have a Mac computer and an iPhone, you can literally just switch between the cameras. Like your phone is already talking to your Mac, and all you have to do is select your phone as the camera option. It'll show it there. It'll be like, John Doe's iPhone. You click
Yeah.
it, you have now started using your iPhone camera rather than your laptop camera. And so those are really the only things that I would recommend. I recommend really getting a good mic. The mic is one thing that I would not cheap out on.
Yeah.
And then just somewhere to hold it, plug it in, and use your phone camera. And then also, when I'm looking at your setup, the biggest thing that I like, first of all, it's great. Like it looks awesome.
Thank you.
For anybody who's on audio,
Everybody's on audio. You're not,
Yeah.
you can't see it, but go see us on YouTube. You'll see this nice little background that I've made.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic. Like it looks great, and I should say I am not a video expert. I'm definitely an audio guy, but I have like a couple years in the game with
I'm sure you
people
can
who
give me
are
some
video
advice,
experts.
though.
Yes. So first of all, on the audio side,
Yes.
there is one there's one way that I think you can I would go out on a limb and say you could double the quality of your audio with literally 15 seconds of work. And that would be that currently your microphone is at this distance from you.
Yeah.
Whereas where I would have it is so close to you that it is literally touching your lips.
Okay.
And that will require you to, you probably can't do it now because you're going to have to lower the volume and mess around with some stuff. But the biggest mistake that I see people make is that their microphones are too far from their face. And the best way would probably be to give you an audio example of what happens when I move the mic away. So right now the mic is touching my lips. I'm like really close to it. As I move it away though, la, 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 la. So you can still hear me, but what has happened now is my voice has become thin. It's become hollow. It's become kind of tinny. And the reason that is because the human voice, the low frequencies travel way less distance than the high frequencies.
Okay.
And so when we move our mic away, we keep all the high tinny stuff. We lose all of the rich, warm, low end of the voice. And so you can literally hear the difference from here is that it's missing depth.
Yeah.
And then when I bring it closer, immediately we get rich warmth again.
Oh man,
so,
I'm getting that Shure mic, and I'm changing that as soon as we're done this podcast. I'm ordering it on Amazon.
Yeah, you should, and then you should talk super close to it. It'll sound almost indistinguishable from my microphone to most people. But the problem with microphones being really close to your face then is then a simple fix. And so what happens when you bring your mic really close, unless you're using an expensive microphone like this one, is you are going to get something called plosives, which is like, it's essentially short for vocal explosives. So anytime that you do a or a K or a T or a Q, any of the things where you are like shooting air out of your mouth really fast into the front of the microphone, what's going to happen is that the microphone's going to like overdose on that, and it's going to go like pop. It's going to create a popping sound.
Okay.
And almost every microphone is going to have this problem unless you go to a microphone that is built to withstand that. So then what people do is you just move the mic to the side of your face, literally a 90-degree angle to your face. It also works to then show your face on camera, right? Because if the mic is right in front of my face, you can't see me. And then you literally talk as close to the microphone as you can. So you press the microphone to the corner of your lips, like where your two lips meet, but then you move it all the way to the side, because now, rather than the air going directly into the front of the microphone like this, it's actually passing the microphone and going straight out, missing all of the bad parts, but still getting the warmth of the low end. And that's how you can tell a pro audio person from somebody who is just using a microphone. Is the mic is close, it's very intentionally placed on their face, and the result is incredibly rich, warm, smooth audio, which is even among YouTube professionals, like major YouTube experts. Everybody knows that audio comes first. Even in YouTube, audio needs to be nearly perfect. Then you can talk about the video elements. So that would be my kind of like um like medical treatment of microphones. But then the other thing, the other thing that I'm kind of noticing with your show
Yes.
is, and by the way, your audio is better than I would say 90% of podcasts that I audit, because I do this a lot and you are already so far ahead. But the other thing that I notice is my audio coming through speakers in front of you right now?
Yes.
So, what you can do is I would recommend having headphones. The reason being is that if my audio is coming through your speakers, it means that a little bit of it is going to actually make its way back into your microphone, which can
Oh,
create a like echoey kind of echo chamber type of sound, which at
yeah.
the end of the day is going to affect the audio. And the other biggest thing that I notice about your audio, and I noticed when I listened as well, because I've
Yeah.
done this a lot, and I've also done a lot of setups in physical rooms, is your room is really bouncy. So there's a lot of hard surfaces
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of soft surfaces. And so what's happening is there's a lot of vocal waves bouncing all over the place. So what's going to happen when you bring your mic closer is that you are going to be delivering a higher volume signal into your microphone, meaning that you will not have to boost the audio in post production to make it louder. Because
Mm.
when you boost the audio in post production, you also boost the room around you. So I can actually hear a lot of your room in your audio. Whereas if you come very close to the microphone, it's like you're creating a little bubble around you, and you are
Yeah.
going to kind of really be able to remedy all of that like audio stuff just with that one fix of bringing the mic close.
Wow.
Yeah.
I could tell that your parents are from Juilliard. This is like a really, really good kind of like lesson. I've never gotten, I love advice like this. I love when I ask people, because we have a lot of people on the show. And one resistance that I have from some guests is when I ask specifically, like when people ask me, what's the best gateway? What's this? I like to just give people what I think. It might
Right.
not be the
Yeah.
same. Like in 3 months, I might change, but I think
Hmm.
people are intelligent enough to know this is what I'm talking about now. And it's
Yeah.
not, the sure mic might be overtaken by somebody else in 6 months from now.
Totally.
That's fine. You know what I mean? It is what it is. But I do love when people give me exactly what you just did, which is like change this, do that. And obviously, I do want to give the caveat to the audience is like, I've been doing this for, over 3 years. There's been some improvements, but now I'm at the advanced basics where I do want to get
Yes.
all this stuff. But I did want to I don't want to dissuade people from starting, because if you look at my
No, of
first couple
course.
of episodes, I had my AirPods, gray background. I was like big dweeb, really didn't know what I was doing. But I will say that I have gotten better at asking questions. I have gotten better at, knowing which parts are good, and it takes practice. I think that's
Yeah.
the only thing. And I still think that I need somebody like you to give me more advice, because it's not my primary business, right? I mean,
Of
my business is
course.
selling merchant accounts,
Yeah.
and that's what I do. But I love talking, as you can tell. So I was like, let's do this. And I do have to say that starting the podcast and doing the YouTube channel and kind of going in media actually brought me way more success than being on stage and meeting people face to face and so forth.
Wow.
Because at a conference, I have 400 or 500 people. I'm talking on stage. Yeah, there's people who talk to me and talk about me and so forth. But once they're gone, they forget about me. This
Yeah.
video, I'm just going to give an example. Specifically this morning, I had a lead that I spoke with. She was like, I literally found you. I found you on YouTube and I
Wow.
binge watched all your content. You are exactly the person that we're looking for, and blah, blah, blah. And I
Nice.
had to do zero sales, zero. That's
Woo.
why I
That's
encourage
amazing.
people, because the leads are just coming in and I don't have to sell. They're already sold. They're like, where do I sign? How do I get to work with you and stuff like that? Because if exactly the point that you mentioned is that people start like watching your content and binge and start watching more and more and more. And by the time they get on the phone, they're like, hey, Maria, they act like they know me. And I'm like,
Yeah. Like they're
I
your
don't know who
friend
this is.
already.
Yeah, they're my
Yeah.
friends. We're talking. And it's wild because, these are people from across the world. I get leads from all over the place. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's so wild. So, I mean, it's a testament to what you're saying is that people want to get to know you. That's how people, I think the cold sales and the people just buying stuff is kind of on its way out. People now want to build relationships. They want to
Yeah.
feel like they know you, they know your brand, they know what you're selling and so forth. So, I mean, this was super valuable, Justin. Justin, I have to say that I'm going to be making some changes
Yeah,
on my
totally.
show. So guys, in the
There's one more
fall.
thing. There's
Oh, okay. I want to hear it. Let's go.
only one more thing because I think it's super fun. That I think that what would be so cool in your background, because your background is great. All I would add is a couple of like $30 to $40 lights like this.
Yeah.
And you could light up those back shelves with a couple of different colors, because when we do look at your video on clips of the podcast or at anything, having those colors to kind of contrast is just going to look so beautiful in the background. And you combine that with your new mic.
Bookcase, you mean?
Yeah, like light up the back of the bookcase and create some light on that wall, and maybe on the other side too, like where that plant is, you could light up the wall a little bit.
Yeah.
And then that combined with your new mic and the stand that kind of comes in from the side and looks like, I think that will be another, because I completely agree with you. Podcasting is just a series of starting and then making upgrades as you go along. But it's the fact that, like, you know, you do want to show up professionally in any content that you create. So when you do start, you know, taking a bit of time to maybe start ahead of, you know, rather than just kind of jumping into it, you could listen to something like this, and immediately now you know, like, you know, now you know how to use a microphone, what mic to get, how to maybe set up your background a little bit, your camera, and now you're kind of starting ahead of the game by, you know,
And all these things, guys, they're not that expensive. You know what I mean? Like, it's a difference of, let's say, $50 for a mic, a couple of lights, a couple of things. Like, you don't have to get super in your head about these things. It's fairly simple. You know, I think with a couple of $100, you can kind of get started and have, you're above at least 50% of the other people, right? With just a couple of $100. I do have one last question, Justin, because I'm curious. You talk fast, you give a lot of advice and so forth. What is the speed of that you listen to podcasts? Like, I ask this to everybody that listens to podcasts, and I like to hear people's opinions. My husband says he can't listen to more than one, because he's like, well, I want to hear the regular people talking, and I'm like, I'm already at 2 and I'm waiting for them to come out to 2.5. So I'm curious, where do you listen?
I'm at 1. I'm always at 1.
Oh, really?
And the reason being is because most of my podcast consumption is very, it's always, there's a lot of depth to what I'm listening to. Like, I find that I'm either listening to something that's maybe like very philosophical or something, and I actually really love the company of a podcast. I love being involved in a conversation between two really smart people, and so I feel like the speed for me is actually part of it. Like, I could get more from it, but for what I'm listening, I actually enjoy the naturalness of it. But so you're listening at 2 and you want more.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think I'm an experienced podcast listener. I don't know if that exists, but I listen to probably, you know, every morning I take a walk. When I do my dishes, I listen to it. I'm always listening to something. I took a bath yesterday. I was like, oh, put a podcast on. Different types of podcasts. I do a lot of lifestyle stuff. I do business stuff. I do parenting stuff. To me, it's the easiest way. Like, I don't watch YouTube. I'm on YouTube, and I get a lot of, you know, people who watch us on YouTube, and I understand everybody has, every demographic, everybody has different, you know, ways of consuming content. For me, YouTube, I don't have the mind share for that. I don't care to watch somebody. I can just put my AirPods on and do a million things. And obviously you can tell I'm a multitasker because that's what I do. But, you know, for me, I can and I feel like it's like a bit of a training for your brain. I've gotten so good at like really extracting a lot of information that I was on a flight and I had downloaded 5 different podcasts, and it must have been like, my flight was 3.5 hours and the content was 6 hours, and I finished them all. And I was like,
crazy.
Oh, yeah.
That's like getting so much time back and so much knowledge through that, you know?
But, you know, I wonder what your average listener is. You know, I'm curious. I don't know if you have a stat of that or some kind of feedback.
I should.
Yeah, because I'm curious, like, how many people listen really fast versus slow. And, you know, obviously we're running out of time, but I'm curious, you know, if that has some kind of impact, like the fact that some people are going really fast, some people are going really slow. Like, is there anything that you should be changing to adapt to the different tempos?
That is a really good question, and one that I actually I don't have. It's funny. It's like I almost always have some kind of answer.
Oh, and I stumped the
I
expert.
don't because like, I mean, what, like, I guess there has to be something out there that has done a study on that, but it's something I don't even think about. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But yeah, so I would just say, to be decided, I guess.
Okay, so we're gonna have another episode at some point. Justin, I'm gonna get a new
For
mic, get
sure.
a new setup, and
Yeah,
get some more advice, and then you'll have the answer to that question.
for
But
sure.
I mean, you gave us such great answers, and it was such an informative episode. I really appreciate you sharing all of the tips and tricks to make us expert podcasters. I'm sure I will be making some changes. So thank you so much for your time. Have yourself a great day.
You too. Thank you for having me. This was great.